Hey, it's Concrete. This is video number 8 in my Flavorah beta testing series, so we're getting close to the end here. Today I do have their Red Velvet, their Wheat, and their Smooth Vanilla. So let's go ahead and give those a shot. And also, of course, have the standard disclaimer thing right here. I didn't pay for these. These will be available October 6th through Bull City Flavors and Nicotine River, and in November and other places. So starting off, I have their Red Velvet flavor. Right off the bat, it's fairly accurate to profile. So a red velvet cake isn't necessarily a completely chocolate cake. It does use a good amount of cocoa as an accent, both for the color and some of the flavor, and this definitely does that. It has like a semi-sweet or like a baking cocoa kind of note to it, but it doesn't necessarily dominate the entire cake flavor. I wouldn't call it a chocolate cake, so that part of it's dead on. It has kind of a lighter, softer, I guess, fluffy texture. It doesn't have a ton of like a really heavy cake grain to it, but it does definitely have that kind of like fluffier body. I think if I had to go ahead and compare it, I've been sort of thinking about something like a grocery store cupcake where you have a good amount of body, but you don't necessarily have like a lot of richness. And I think that fits in with kind of the cocoa note here too. It also kind of feels to me like the actual cake part of something like a ding dong, where it's kind of insubstantial, not particularly rich, but there is like a light chocolate and there's definitely a texture there. There's no frosting note in here at all. It's just straight up, just a red velvet cake base. I didn't notice anything weird about it. There's no real off flavors. There's nothing really to watch out for. It's just a nice, solid sort of red velvet cake base. In terms of usage percentage and sort of where you'd use it, so I do feel like it needs just a little bit more texture if you want like that kind of satisfying cake taste to it. I think if you wanted to fill out sort of like a full-on red velvet cake, you could go ahead and you could try cranking this to like 3 or 4%. There's no off flavors there. Nothing will taste weird, but I'm not sure it's necessarily going to get that kind of grainier body. Generally, if you're going to be making a cake flavor, you're going to have a frosting in there too. So I don't think it'd be out of place to go ahead and layer this at maybe like 1%, 1.5% with a heavier, denser yellow cake flavor, or like even one of the vanilla cupcake flavors. Don't think that would be any kind of issue, and I think since this is a little bit top heavy, it's going to come through in that mix and still kind of stand out as a red velvet cake. So the obvious pairing here would be cream cheese icing, so have fun with that. You could use some shisha vanilla or some Flavorah frosting or something to kind of get the frosting base, and then some Loran's cream cheese icing, or maybe even a little bit of brie cheese by Flavorah to kind of get the cheesiness of that frosting. But as it stands, I think it's a pretty solid cake base. I think it maybe needs a little bit of help in the texture, but it's a pretty mellow flavor. It isn't as aggressive to me as something like Flavorah's Chocolate Deutsch, which is definitely a chocolate cake flavor, but it also doesn't have that kind of coconut note that Chocolate Deutsch does. So I think this might be a little bit more versatile if you want like a chocolate cake base or even like a red velvet cake base, and you want to go ahead and add some of your own texture and some of your own frosting notes and stuff in there. Next, I have their wheat flavor. So as you'd kind of expect for a flavor named wheat, this is kind of interesting. Um, and sort of the experience with it changes quite a bit based on percentage. So at a lower percentage, like sub 1%, maybe even lower like that than that, like 0.25 up to maybe about 0.75, you do get kind of just a wheat note out of it. It's interesting. It's almost like a cracked wheat note. There's a little bit of sweetness in the base that doesn't necessarily fit with that wheat note. I get like maybe just a hint of sourness, but really, I don't think it's going to be any kind of issue when you're actually mixing it. I think And this again kind of feels like a little bit of a top note. Like while I'm getting like a distinct wheat taste, I'm not really getting a sort of drier texture out of it. So I think it's gonna work best as a top note. If you start to crank up the percentage a little bit, you do notice that there is some yeastiness in this flavor. And I think yeasty flavors in vaping tend to get a little bit of a bad name just because a lot of them are like hyper aggressive, like Flavor Art's Joy or Flavorah's Fried Dough. And if you add just a little bit too much, they go just straight into stale beer territory. This doesn't necessarily seem to have the same thing going on. It seems a little bit more easygoing. It's a very sort of soft, warm, subtle yeast flavor. So at higher percentages, it does pick up a little bit of like that bread flavor. I'd say maybe around 1.5%. That yeastiness starts to sort of come through and it kind of coheres. And that wheat bread flavor itself isn't like a super aggressive, like hippie grade, like 18 grain, like dry tree bark kind of wheat flavor. It's more of like the brown version of square bread, wheat bread flavor. Again, though, I do feel like it's a little bit top heavy in this application, and so you'd probably want to bring in some kind of warmer source of AP to kind of fill it out a little bit. I've been saying Cap 027. I've just had that on my brain, but it's a pretty good low impact, warm source of AP, and I think you could get some more texture and a little bit of warmth to kind of do a wheat bread a lot better if you brought in some additional AP there. I think if you start to kind of dial it back a little bit and use it more as an accent, around like 0.75%, I think this has like an interesting sort of set of uses for a lot of bakeries and cereals. I think you could do some flavor bending, like for something like an old-fashioned donut that has like a less refined flour. I think a little bit of this could to like a donut base could kind of give you that effect. And also with some cereals, I mean, obviously you crank it way up and have some straight wheat cereals, but I think this would add like a little bit of hardiness to cereal bases, maybe give them a little bit more body, a little bit more interest. But yeah, remarkably easygoing for a wheat flavor. That was kind of what I was scared of when I first got it. I didn't really find too many like catastrophic off notes or anything too weird. I do think that it gets a little bit of like a greener, like malt kind of taste to it, like once you get up above 2%. So I'd probably keep it under that. But overall, very solid flavor, good top note, good accent for a lot of different things. So last we have their Smooth Vanilla. So I may have to apologize because I'm fairly hyped on this one. I might seem a little over-eager and I don't want to alarm anybody. So this is a very bright commercial vanilla flavor. In terms of like comparing it to other vanilla flavors, it reminds me more of like the vanilla in Aware Shisha Vanilla or the vanilla in Flavor Art's Vanilla Classic. It's a very bright, sort of solid commercial vanilla flavor. It differs from the vanilla bean flavor that I reviewed in a previous video in that that's like kind of a darker, spicier vanilla. This is definitely like a big, bright, in-your-face vanilla. And it's good. It has a lot of really interesting nuance to it. It's almost a little bit fruity. Like it almost has like a little bit of a sort of bright cherry, light almond kind of fruitiness to it. But yeah, it's kind of a steamroller of a vanilla, which is interesting. I've never had a vanilla before that I've actually tested up high enough, and I was like, oh god, this is too much vanilla. But I definitely got this, and I was only up at like 1%, and then the 3% was an absolute nightmare. So going back to the 0.25% sample, that also seemed just a little bit high for me. So just to kind of test it out a little bit more, I did a mix with this at 0.15% with Innerware's custard. And while that kind of bright vanilla isn't necessarily the vanilla you want for something eggier, like a custard, it seemed to be a lot closer to the right kind of level. It just added like this absolutely beautiful steamroller of like bright commercial vanilla flavor in there without necessarily tasting too one-dimensional like something like straight vanilla will. Yeah, like I said, I'm hyped on this. This is going to be the vanilla flavor that you actually have to make a dilution for, which is kind of cool. It's strong. It's definitely strong. So I would definitely start low and sort of work up. And so, as this is that kind of like brighter commercial vanilla flavor, I think it's going to be a vanilla more for like your straight ahead like ice creams. It reminds me a lot of vanilla from like a marshmallow. So you're looking at some kind of bakeries too. But the other cool thing is with this kind of vanilla, I think with those fruity kind of floral notes, it's going to be a really good vanilla for sort of like non-traditional vanilla uses, like adding into fruits and like floral mixes and stuff like that. It's just like kind of a big, bright, slap you right in the face vanilla. And I'm not sure what the pricing is going to end up being, but I will say the concentration here seems something like it's on par with something like their rich cinnamon or their clove flavor, which are, more expensive flavors, obviously. But they're also ridiculously concentrated. So overall, yeah, I think I'm really hyped on this vanilla, actually. I really like their vanilla bean and I really like this vanilla, and they kind of address two different issues, and they're both definitely additives for me. There is a little bit of body to this, I want to say, but it's not like a vanilla cream flavor. There's like a little bit almost like a sponge cakey kind of dry body, but I don't think you're going to be using enough of this concentrate to really run into that. I don't think that's going to be an issue. But yeah, overall, I actually really like this one. So that was batch 8 of my Flavorah testing. We have one more batch of these left to go. We got 4 more flavors after this. I believe it's their apple, their sun cookie, their sugar orchid, and their cherry blossoms. Those are interesting, and I'm completely out of my depths trying to figure out what's going on there, but we'll go ahead and give it a shot. After that, we'll have like a wrap-up video with the Flavorah flavors where I'll pick out some of my top flavors and then talk like a little bit more in depth about how I would use them and kind of how I end up using the Flavorah line when I'm mixing. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. Thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. I'll catch you later.